She showed up with a dozen kids and a smile, announcing my pool was hers for the day. She brought a contract. I brought something better. The summer sun baked the asphalt of Elm Street, making the air shimmer above the freshly manicured lawns. For months, it had been a symphony of quiet contentment, the hum of sprinklers, the distant drone of a lawnmower, the lazy chirp of cicadas. But on this Tuesday morning, the harmony was shattered by the arrival of a maroon minivan, a beast of a vehicle that barreled down the street and screeched to a halt in front of my grandfather's house. I was inside, the cool air of the AC a welcome balm against the oppressive heat, when the doorbell rang. Not the polite chime I was used to, but a series of insistent, rapid-fire jabs. My blood ran cold. I knew that ring. It belonged to Brenda. Brenda, who lived 2 doors down in a house that seemed to be in a perpetual state of renovation, was the self-proclaimed empress of the neighborhood. She ruled her small fiefdom with an iron fist, armed with a clipboard and a menacing smile that never quite reached her eyes. Since I had moved in a year ago, taking over my late grandfather's property, she had made it her personal mission to integrate me into the community, which was code for bend to her will. She had tried to get me to replace my grandfather's prize-winning rose bushes with more modern hydrangeas. She had lectured me for a full half-hour on the unacceptable noise levels of my grandfather's ancient wind chime. I had endured it all with a patient nod and a silent prayer for her to just go away. But this was different. I opened the door to a vision of aggressive suburbia. Brenda stood there, her blonde hair perfectly coiffed, her face a mask of saccharine, pleasantness. Beside her was a small boy in a bright blue sun hat, clutching a deflated pool noodle. He looked terrified. Behind them, a stream of children, a veritable army of them, poured out of the minivan, their excited shrieks echoing down the silent street. "Brenda," I said, my voice as flat as I could make it. "Is everything all right?" She didn't answer my question. Instead, she gestured with a practiced flourish towards the back of my house. "Oh, everything's wonderful, Alex. We're just so excited. It's my son Timothy's 8th birthday, and he's wanted a pool party all summer. Isn't that right, sweetie?" Timothy, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, managed a pathetic nod. My mind raced. A pool party? Here? On my property? I had an in-ground pool, a beautiful $60,000 piece of construction my grandfather had built when he first moved in. It was my sanctuary, the place where I went to escape the endless anxieties of my first year of law school. It was, in every sense of the word, mine. "Brenda," I repeated, my tone hardening. "What are you talking about?" She laughed, a short, clipped sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, don't be silly. The committee voted. It's a community resource now. We're a shared amenity neighborhood, didn't you know? I have the paperwork right here." She patted a folder she was carrying. "We just couldn't let a perfectly good pool sit unused all summer. It's a waste, and we're all about resourcefulness here on Elm Street." My jaw went slack. The audacity was breathtaking. There was no committee. There was no such thing as a shared amenity neighborhood. This was a quiet, private street with individually owned properties. She was lying, and she was doing it with the unshakable confidence of someone who had never been challenged. My voice dropped to a low, dangerous whisper. "Brenda, this is a private residence. My private residence. The pool is not a community resource. It's my property." Her smile didn't waver. It simply tightened at the corners. "Well, that's just a matter of opinion, isn't it? The neighborhood association bylaws clearly state that all recreational facilities are for the enjoyment of all residents." "There is no neighborhood association," I said, feeling a tremor in my hand. "And even if there were, those kinds of rules don't apply to privately owned property without a binding legal agreement." Brenda's eyes narrowed slightly, the first crack in her polished facade. "Oh, is that what you think? Well, perhaps you should have read your paperwork more carefully when you moved in." We sent you a copy of the amended bylaws last year. I have a signed receipt for them right here." A cold knot of dread formed in my stomach. Was it possible? Had I missed something in the flurry of paperwork when I took over the house? My grandfather had handled everything. What if I had signed something without realizing the implications? The thought was nauseating. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my voice even. "Brenda, I'm asking you one last time to leave my property. Take the children and go. If you don't, I will call the police." Her face, for the first time, lost its smile entirely. It was replaced by a mask of cold fury. "You wouldn't dare. The neighbors are watching. What will they think? That you're a selfish monster, ruining a little boy's birthday party?" She gestured to the dozen children who were now congregating near the edge of my driveway, their excited chatter now tinged with confused whispers. Timothy looked like he was about to burst into tears. Brenda's voice rose, theatrical and booming. "Look at this, everyone! A whole community trying to share a resource, and a single selfish man wants to hoard it all to himself." A few curious heads poked out of nearby windows. It was a classic Brenda move. The public shaming, the appeal to community spirit she only ever used when it suited her. A wave of impotent rage washed over me. I wanted to scream, to lash out, but my years of studying the law had taught me one thing above all else: emotion has no place in a legal argument. The law is a cold, hard, unfeeling thing. It deals in facts, precedents, and evidence. I stepped back from the door, a slow smile spreading across my face. It wasn't a pleasant smile like Brenda's. It was the smile of a predator who has cornered its prey. I looked her dead in the eye, and the fear in them, for the first time, was real. "You're right, Brenda," I said, my voice low and deliberate. "Paperwork is important. It's the only thing that matters, really. So since you brought yours, I guess I should bring mine." I turned and walked back into the house, leaving the front door wide open. The children looked on in silent confusion, a few of the more adventurous ones starting to creep up my driveway. Brenda stood frozen, her eyes wide with a mixture of confusion and dawning fear. She didn't know what I had. She didn't know that my grandfather, in his final years, had been in a protracted legal battle with the neighborhood association over a perceived easement. She didn't know that he had won. And she certainly didn't know that I had spent the last 8 months not just living here, but meticulously cataloging every single detail of that victory, every document, every filing, every single piece of legal precedent. When I came back to the door, I was no longer the confused young man she had come to dominate. I was a litigator. My hands were steady as I held up a single sheet of paper. It wasn't a deed or a copy of the bylaws. It was something far more satisfying. It was a cease and desist letter, meticulously worded and signed by my law firm's senior partner. Brenda's confident smile faltered. She took a hesitant step back as I held the paper out to her. It was addressed to her, a single damning page detailing her trespass, her harassment, and her fraudulent claims. The letter didn't just demand she leave, it outlined a precise and undeniable legal case against her, complete with citations, case law, and a timeline for a formal lawsuit. It ended with a paragraph that made it clear she was not just attempting to take over my pool, she was attempting to commit a crime. Her face, a moment ago so full of triumph, now went a sickly shade of white. Her eyes darted from the letterhead to my face, then back to the document, where the words seemed to burn into her retinas. I watched her read it, her lips moving silently as her face drained of all color, and I spoke the final calm words she didn't see coming. "You're on my property, Brenda, without permission, and based on this letter, you have a matter of moments to rectify that. The party's over." Brenda's world, a fortress built on assumptions and aggressive entitlement, collapsed around her with the rustle of a single sheet of paper. Her hands, which moments before had been so confidently patting a fraudulent folder, now trembled. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted from the letterhead, the name of a prestigious multi-billion-dollar law firm, to my calm, unwavering face. The children, still buzzing with the excitement of a day they believed would be spent in the cool, chlorinated water, had fallen silent. Their expectant faces were now turned towards Brenda, their innocent anticipation transforming into confused anxiety. Timothy, her son, pulled on her floral-patterned shorts. "Mommy, are we going? Swimming now?" he whispered, his small voice cutting through the thick, oppressive silence. Brenda didn't answer him. The color had drained from her cheeks, leaving her skin a pasty, sickly white. She wasn't a beautiful woman, but her carefully constructed image, a facade of suburban perfection, was her armor. Now, that armor was shattered, and underneath, there was only a desperate, terrified fury. This is a fake," she stammered, her voice a reedy imitation of its former booming self. "You're just trying to scare us. This is a joke, right? You're ruining my son's party with a fake letter. You can't do that." Her denial was a last flailing attempt at control. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The letter spoke for itself. My silence was a weapon, far more effective than any shouted argument. She had come prepared for a battle of wills. I had brought a war of facts. One of the parents from the back of the group, a man with a polite, bewildered expression, stepped forward. "Brenda, is everything all right? What's going on?" Brenda, her eyes still locked on me, pointed a trembling finger. "He's being a bully, Gary. He's trying to kick us out of the community pool with a fake letter. Look at him. He's a monster." The word bully seemed to ignite something in me. For a year, I had tolerated her constant intrusions, her petty criticisms, her attempts to dominate me. I had been passive, polite. Now she was accusing me of the very thing she was guilty of. I stepped forward, but not to argue with her. My gaze went directly to the other parents. There were a dozen or so children, and maybe 5 or 6 adults, all now standing in a confused, anxious semicircle on my driveway. "My name is Alex," I said, my voice clear and steady. "And this is my house. This is not a community pool. It is a private residence." I held up the cease and desist letter so they could all see the official letterhead. Brenda arrived unannounced this morning with a group of children, under the false pretense that this pool is a shared resource. It is not. She has no legal right to be on this property, nor do any of you. This letter informs her of that fact, and outlines the legal consequences should she continue her trespass. Gary, the polite man, looked at Brenda with a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "Brenda, you said the neighborhood association voted on this." "They did!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "He's lying. He's a liar. He's trying to ruin Timothy's party. Don't you believe him? Believe me." Her desperation was palpable. The children started to whisper, a low, buzzing murmur that felt like a swarm of angry bees. Timothy, seeing his mother's distress, started to cry. The sound was a heart-wrenching little sob, a genuine sadness that I found myself feeling empathy for. It wasn't the boy's fault. He was just a pawn in his mother's vicious game. Suddenly, a woman with kind eyes and a sensible haircut stepped forward. "Brenda, if this isn't a community pool, we can't stay here. It's not right. We should leave." "No!" Brenda screamed. She lunged forward and snatched the letter from my hand, tearing it in half with a violent, satisfying rip. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent street. "There! Now it's just paper. It means nothing." A gasp went through the group of parents. This was a new level of unhinged behavior. I watched the 2 torn halves of the document flutter to the ground, a single tear from Timothy's face splashing onto the pristine white paper. A cold smile of pure, focused anger spread across my face. "That's what you think, Brenda?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, a small black object that suddenly felt like a weapon of immense power. This is a notarized copy, and I've already sent a scanned version to the police and to a process server. Your trespassing and destruction of private property have just been meticulously documented and witnessed by every person standing on this driveway. The triumph on my face was a mirror of her former confidence. Only this was real. This wasn't a bluff. It was a promise. Brenda's eyes widened, her bravado evaporating into thin air. She looked around at the faces of her friends and neighbors. Faces that now held not just confusion and anxiety, but disgust. She had tried to leverage her community and her friends against me, but in a moment of utter desperation, she had revealed herself as a fraud. Timothy's crying intensified. The sensible woman put an arm around him. "Brenda," she said, her voice filled with a quiet pity, "we're taking our kids to the park. The party is over." Brenda looked at me, then at the letter on the ground, then back to me. A slow, chilling realization dawned on her face. She hadn't just lost the battle for the pool. She had lost her carefully cultivated reputation, her control over her social circle, and her dignity. The party was indeed over, but not just for Timothy. It was over for her. For good. Her shoulders slumped. She looked defeated, small. The Empress of Elm Street was dethroned. The other parents, in a silent, coordinated movement, began herding their children back to their cars. One by one, the minivans and SUVs started to pull away, leaving Brenda, her humiliated son, and the torn halves of a cease and desist letter on my driveway. As the last car drove off, leaving the silence of the neighborhood to once again be broken. Only by the chirping of cicadas, a single, final tremor of rage passed through her. She was a woman who had never failed, never been challenged. The sting of this loss was a poison she couldn't bear. She looked at me, at my door, at my house, and her face twisted into a grotesque mask of hatred. Her eyes, filled with a promise of retribution, locked onto mine. She wasn't defeated. She was just regrouping. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was just the beginning. The silence that descended upon Elm Street was heavier and more profound than the one before the storm. The last minivan had vanished around the corner, leaving behind a stillness punctuated only by the distant, high-pitched wail of a child, presumably Timothy. I stood on my driveway, the sun beating down on my shoulders, and the torn halves of the cease and desist letter, a pathetic, crumpled offering at my feet. The moment of triumph had passed, leaving behind a residue of hollow exhaustion. I was alone, and yet I wasn't. Brenda's eyes, filled with a promise of retribution, were burned into my memory. That final, venomous look was not the look of a defeated person. It was the look of a person who had just lost the first round and was already planning the next. The battle for the pool was over, but the war for my peace of mind had just begun. A wave of nausea washed over me. I wasn't a litigator yet, just a student. I was more comfortable with case law and torts than with public shaming and a neighbor's unhinged fury. I bent down and picked up the 2 torn pieces of paper. The act felt symbolic, like gathering the fragments of a grenade that had just exploded in my face. The damage was done, but the fallout was yet to come. I went inside, locked the door, and sank into a kitchen chair, my hands still trembling. For the rest of the day, I was a prisoner in my own home. Every sound, every car that slowed down on the street, every shadow that moved across my window sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I kept expecting the doorbell to ring again, for the police to show up after a bogus call from Brenda. The call never came. The street remained quiet. The pool sat, shimmering and pristine, under the afternoon sun, a silent witness to the suburban chaos that had just unfolded. That evening I decided to take a walk. It was a foolish, reckless decision, but I needed to feel the pavement under my feet to see the world beyond my windows. As I walked, I saw the faces. They weren't glaring or hostile. They were a mix of curiosity, pity, and a certain kind of guarded admiration. A few people nodded tentatively. One woman, a friendly, older woman named Mrs. Gable, who lived across the street, gave me a small, conspiratorial smile as she watered her roses. It was a silent acknowledgement of what had happened, a silent thank you for standing up to Brenda. The public humiliation had worked, but not in the way Brenda had intended. She had overplayed her hand, and the neighbors, who had probably been tolerating her for years, had seen her for what she was. That night, for the first time in a year, I slept soundly. I had won. For now. The next morning, the real war began. I woke to the incessant ringing of my phone. It was my mother. Her voice, usually calm and measured, was high-pitched and frantic. "Alex, what did you do?" she shrieked. "Mrs. Henderson from church just called me. She said you threatened a woman and her children with legal action, that you made a little boy cry on his birthday. The whole neighborhood is talking." A cold knot formed in my stomach. Brenda wasn't just going to fight me on Elm Street. She was going to fight me on the battlefield of public perception, using the one thing I couldn't control: gossip. She had taken her defeat and twisted it into a narrative where I was the villain, a heartless bully who had ruined a child's special day. I spent the next hour on the phone, trying to explain the situation to my mother. She was a kind, gentle woman who believed the best in people, and the story Brenda was spreading was a poison she found difficult to process. I told her the truth, the whole story, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. Brenda had been so good at this, so practiced. The half-truths and emotional manipulation she used were more effective than any legal precedent. When I hung up, I felt a bone-deep weariness. It was one thing to fight a legal battle. It was another to fight a war of attrition against a master manipulator. Brenda wasn't just trying to take my pool. She was trying to turn the entire neighborhood against me, to make me so miserable that I would either give in or move away. A knock on the door startled me. It was Mrs. Gable. She held a plate of freshly baked cookies. "Honey," she said, her kind eyes full of sympathy, "don't you worry about a thing. That Brenda has been a menace on this street for years. We all saw what she did. And you did the right thing. Just wanted to bring you these, a little peace offering from the rest of us." Her simple gesture felt like a lifeline. The community wasn't united against me. They were divided. It was a cold comfort, but a comfort nonetheless. I spent the rest of the week in a state of hypervigilance, waiting for Brenda's next move. It came in the form of a certified letter. I opened it with a feeling of dread, my hands shaking. It wasn't from her, but from a law firm, a small, local firm I had never heard of. The letter was a formal complaint, accusing me of malicious harassment, defamation, and emotional distress. It demanded a formal apology and a payment of $5,000 for damages. It was a bluff, an amateurish attempt to scare me. But it was also a tangible escalation. She had lawyered up. I sat with the letter for a long time, the cool paper a stark contrast to the boiling anger in my veins. My legal education, which had felt so academic and distant just a week ago, was now a shield, a weapon, and my only defense. The letter was full of holes, full of misstatements and exaggerations. I could dismantle it in a matter of minutes. But it wasn't about the letter. It was about what it represented. Brenda was not going to stop. She was going to keep pushing, keep probing for a weakness, keep escalating the situation until I broke. This wasn't about a pool or a party. It was a deeply personal, psychological war. I went to my home office, the room where my grandfather had once read the paper and where I now spent my nights poring over textbooks. I pulled out a fresh legal pad and a pen. It was time to stop reacting and start acting. It was time to go on the offensive. I couldn't just dismiss her claims. I had to prove that they were not just false, but malicious. I began to draft a formal response to the law firm, a letter that would not only dismiss their claims, but also outline the consequences of their participation in Brenda's scheme. I would file a counter-complaint. I would meticulously document every phone call, every piece of mail, every witness who had seen her tantrum. As I wrote, my mind raced. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was a classic legal chess match. My grandfather had won the first battle, but she had come back for a second round. It was time to use the rules of the game against her. I was finishing up the final paragraph of my letter, outlining my intent to seek damages for emotional distress, when my phone buzzed with a new message. It was a text from an unknown number. The text was a link to a private Facebook group, Elm Street Community Watch. I had been blocked from the page, but the screenshot was a perfect square of righteous fury. It was a long post, a screed from Brenda, detailing my atrocious behavior and ending with a new, terrifying call to action. "Let's show him what happens when you cross the Elm Street community," it read. "I'm holding a yard sale next weekend to raise money for Timothy's ruined party. And to send a clear message. Don't let him win." The message was a calculated escalation. She wasn't just fighting me with legal letters and gossip. She was trying to mobilize the entire neighborhood against me to make a public spectacle of her victimhood. It was a brilliant, terrifying move. But as I looked at the screenshot, I noticed something in the background of her profile picture, a small detail I had missed before. It was a tiny, barely visible sign on her front lawn. It was a small, almost unnoticeable sign from the county zoning office, a code violation. And not just any code violation, one that my grandfather had fought and won years ago. A single cold smile of pure, focused triumph spread across my face. I knew exactly what to do. I put down my pen, walked over to my bookshelf, and pulled out an old, dusty file filled with legal documents. The sign on her lawn wasn't just a coincidence. It was a declaration of war. And with that file in my hand, I was ready to bring the entire legal system down on her head. The legal file felt like a relic from another era, smelling of old paper and the quiet determination of a man who had fought a war on his own terms. My grandfather, a retired engineer with a penchant for meticulous detail, had kept every document. I blew the dust off the top and began to pore through the pages, my heart pounding with a cold, exhilarating certainty. This wasn't about revenge. This was about justice. This was about turning the tables on a bully who had overstepped her bounds. The file was a roadmap of a forgotten battle. It detailed a protracted dispute between my grandfather and the City Planning and Zoning Committee. At the center of the conflict was a dispute over a sunroom that Brenda's home had added onto the back of her house 10 years prior. The blueprints, the official complaints, the denial letters, they were all there, meticulously organized and cross-referenced. The issue, my grandfather's notes explained, was not about the structure itself, but its location. It encroached by a mere 2 feet onto a protected zoning setback line, a small, unnoticeable encroachment that nonetheless violated a fundamental ordinance. My grandfather had not been the one to report it. A disgruntled neighbor had. But when he learned of the situation, he had been a tireless advocate for following the law to the letter. Brenda, it turned out, had used her charm and influence to convince a previous, more lenient zoning officer to grant her a temporary variance, a verbal agreement that was never properly filed or made official. The documents showed that the case had been a mess of legal loopholes and informal promises. My grandfather, ever the bulldog, had not given up. He had spent months writing letters, citing precedents and even threatening a lawsuit against the city itself. His persistence had paid off. The final page in the file was a certified letter from the city, dated 8 years prior, rescinding the unofficial variance and formally declaring the sunroom a non-compliant structure. The letter had given Brenda a 6-month grace period to either demolish the sunroom or face escalating fines and a forced demolition order. The grace period had expired. The order had never been enforced. Brenda had used her clout and social capital to make the problem quietly disappear. But the violation, according to the letter, remained on file with the city, a ticking time bomb waiting for someone to find it. The tiny, barely visible sign in her profile picture wasn't a county zoning sign at all. It was an old construction permit from the original build, which she must have forgotten to remove. The irony was exquisite. The woman who was attempting to take over my property for her child's party had built her own home on a foundation of legal non-compliance. I put the file down and felt a wave of calm wash over me. I knew my next move. I wasn't just going to report the violation. That would be too simple, too fast. I was going to use this information to take away the one thing she cherished more than anything else, her social standing. The public shaming she had orchestrated was a double-edged sword, and I was about to use it against her. The next morning I saw her. She was outside, setting up for her yard sale. A few parents, the same ones from the day before, were helping her. The scene was perfectly manicured, a tableau of suburban martyrdom. Signs were propped up on the lawn, emblazoned with slogans like "Raising money for Timothy's birthday" and "A community comes together." The children were there too, looking tired and confused, their faces plastered with a sort of forced cheerfulness. Brenda, in a pair of perfectly pressed denim shorts and a crisp white t-shirt, was a vision of righteous indignation. She was playing her role to perfection. I took a deep breath, straightened my shirt, and walked over. The moment I stepped onto her lawn, all conversation ceased. Every head turned. Brenda's saccharine smile froze on her face. Her eyes, filled with a predatory glee, locked onto mine, a silent challenge. She thought I was coming to beg, to apologize, to give in to her pressure. "Good morning, Brenda," I said, my voice calm and low. I didn't raise it. The people helping her were too close. They could hear every word. Her smile faltered. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Come to finally make things right?" I shook my head slowly, never breaking eye contact. "No, Brenda. I came to let you know something important. I found something on my property, an old file from my grandfather." Her expression shifted from smugness to a flicker of confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about paperwork," I said, a slow, chilling smile spreading across my face. "Specifically, paperwork about your sunroom." Her face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks with a speed that was almost comical. Her eyes darted from me to the sunroom, then back to me again, filled with a dawning, suffocating terror. I didn't need to say more. She knew. She knew the file existed, and she knew what it contained. The people around her looked on in confused silence, oblivious to the silent, invisible bombs that were now dropping around Brenda. I had taken her public stage and, with a few quiet words, had turned it into a courtroom. The yard sale she had organized to shame me was about to become the site of her greatest humiliation. "The party's over, Brenda," I said, using her own words against her. "And I'm afraid the demolition crew is next." I turned and walked away, leaving her frozen, her yard sale now a morbid monument to her impending downfall. Brenda stood frozen on her lawn, a statue of pure, unadulterated shock. The words "demolition crew" hung in the air like a death sentence. The tableau of the perfect yard sale, with its jaunty signs and brightly colored items, had shattered. The other parents, who just moments ago had been helping her set up, exchanged bewildered glances. Gary, the polite man from the day before, took a step back, a hand reaching for his wife's arm. The hum of their conversation evaporated, replaced by a thick, oppressive silence that seemed to hum with unspoken questions. Brenda's eyes were wild, darting from the sunroom, a structure she had so confidently and illegally built, to the faces of her neighbors. Her lips moved, a silent, frantic prayer for the ground to open up and swallow her whole. The humiliation of the pool incident was a public relations disaster. This was a personal and financial apocalypse. I didn't turn back. I walked away with the deliberate pace of a man who knew he held all the cards. I could feel her gaze on my back, a hot, venomous stare that promised retribution. But I wasn't scared. For the first time, she was fighting on my turf, a battlefield of legal precedent and documented facts. When I was safely inside, the cool air of my home a welcome relief from the boiling tension outside, I went directly to my computer. The city of Riverwood had a website with a specific section for zoning and code enforcement complaints. The digital form was a simple thing, a few text boxes and a file upload. I meticulously filled out every field, detailing the exact nature of the violation, citing the specific ordinance my grandfather's file had referenced, and attaching a high-resolution scan of the certified letter from the city council. The process was cold, unemotional, and methodical. It was the antithesis of Brenda's chaos. As I clicked submit, a sense of profound calm settled over me. The wheels of justice, slow as they might be, were now in motion. An hour later, I saw the last of the yard sale helpers leave. Brenda stood alone in the middle of her lawn, a solitary figure among the cluttered tables and discarded junk. The show of support had evaporated, leaving her completely exposed. I watched from my kitchen window as she began to furiously pack up the remaining items, tossing them into boxes with a frantic, unhinged energy. The afternoon passed in a quiet that was more unnerving than the chaos of the morning. I felt a sense of anticipation, a low-level hum of dread. Brenda was a cornered animal. She wouldn't simply roll over and accept defeat. I checked my security cameras, a new addition I had installed after the first incident, and watched as she paced her backyard, her hands on her hips, staring at her sunroom as if it were a traitorous friend. Just before dusk, the front doorbell rang. My heart hammered against my ribs. I looked at the security camera feed. It was Brenda. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't holding a folder. She was alone, her face a contorted mask of pure, murderous rage. I didn't open the door. "Alex, open this." "Doctor, right now!" she screamed, her voice a raw, unhinged shriek that carried across the lawn. "You think you can just do this to me? You think you can ruin my life? You've got a sickness, Alex. You're a sociopath." I walked to the window. She saw me. Her eyes narrowed into slits of pure hatred. "I know what you did. I know you're trying to ruin me. I'm going to make your life a living hell, you hear me?" She pounded on the door, a frantic, desperate rhythm that echoed through the house. "You took my pool. Now I'm going to take everything from you." Her empty threats were a pathetic echo of her former bravado. I simply watched, a cool, unfeeling observer of her complete mental collapse. She pounded on the door a few more times, her body shaking with frustration, before she finally gave up and stormed back to her house. It was 10 o'clock that night when I heard the sound, a low, grinding, metallic sound that came from the side of my house near the air conditioning unit. I was sitting in my living room, reading, when the sound stopped abruptly, followed by the distant slam of a car door and the screech of tires. I walked to the side of the house and peered out the window. Nothing. The street was quiet, but the air was heavy with the smell of gasoline. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't a war of words. I went back inside, grabbed a flashlight, and crept out the back door. The sound had been coming from near the pool pump, a large, powerful unit that circulated the water and kept it clean. I shined the light on the unit, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The electrical box, a sealed unit I had just checked that morning, was open. The wiring inside was severed and melted. The smell of burnt wire was pungent and acrid. I moved the flashlight to the pump itself. The clear plastic cover was gone, replaced by a gaping hole. Inside, the motor was a mess of shattered plastic and twisted metal. It had been destroyed, smashed, and next to it, on the ground, lay a small black object I recognized instantly. It was a hammer, the kind you buy at a hardware store, and nestled in the grass, half hidden by a bush, was a small, glittering piece of jewelry. A silver bracelet with an ornate charm of a sun, a charm I had seen Brenda wear 1,000 times. She hadn't just tried to intimidate me. She had come back under the cover of darkness and destroyed my property. The silence was not a sign of her retreat. It was a sign of her descent. She had crossed the line from petty harassment to outright criminality. I stood there, the flashlight beam illuminating the scene of the crime, a small, grim smile spreading across my face. She thought she was going to make my life a living hell. But what she didn't know was that I had already downloaded all the footage from the security cameras. I had captured her every move. She had just handed me the legal victory. I needed a victory so profound it would not only take her sunroom but her freedom.